maybe she was talking to someone who's in a simulator or something like that. Maybe she's just in a ground control station, and someone's in a capsule simulator or flying a plane or do something, and she's just talking him through the procedures. That's actually a reasonable possibility. What about I can see a flame? Again, nobody heard anything like I can see a flame. Am I going to crash? Nobody heard anything like, am I going to crash? A lot of this translation was, the translation, where it came from originally, one of the Judica Cordelia brothers' girlfriends spoke Russian. I wasn't able to determine if she was a native Russian speaker or if she just, thought she knew enough Russian to be dangerous, but that's where this original translation came from. And I will re-enter, this one's interesting, it means it's time to come back now. Return is what my Russians thought she was saying. Now I should qualify this that the recording is very, very garbled. Nobody had an easy time understanding any of it. So for you folks in the audience who raised your hand and said you want to speak Russian or you can speak Russian, I would love to hear your take on this. If you want to send me an email afterwards or talk to me and give me your email, I would love to give you the recording and have you tell me what you think it says. Because I'd love to improve this talk. It's a talk that I give a lot. So that's where we end up. The critical thinking process doesn't always take us to the answer, but at least we were able to learn a lot. A lot of this stuff is very fun, it's very interesting, and we were pretty much able to rule out conclusively that Ludmila was not a lost cosmonaut. But we had a lot of fun in the process. I want to point you to a couple of sources that I found very, very helpful in this. They were just terrific. This website, astronautics.com, you will find on this an incredible amount of information from the Soviet space program. A lot of those documents I talked about that have been declassified are now translated into English, maybe other languages, I'm not sure, and they're available on this. The website lostcosmonauts.com is a very popular one, and it's a completely credulous source, meaning it promotes what the Judica Cordelia brothers interpreted these recordings as. I think in quite an uncritical way. It simply just repeats the idea that, hey, this is a conspiracy theory and these people died in space. And then for information on these Soviet X-planes, these rocket planes and so forth that were either built or not built, I found a terrific book by Midland Publishers called Soviet X-Planes. So there's a lot of really good information in there. And that's the end of the talk. So. And I actually talked 5 minutes faster than I meant to, so we have 5 minutes extra for Q&A.
Questions, I guess. Well, thank you very much, Brian. Are there any questions? There are 2 mics in the aisles. If you've got a question, please walk to the mic, and Brian will answer them.
If anyone's curious, if you see this drawing that's on here while you're thinking of your questions, can you read what it says right there? And who knows what that later became, where that name was used again? That is the Russian space shuttle, that's right. This was an early prototype. This was a scramjet. You can see the compressor cone on the front of it there that was launched with some sort of a chemical-powered rocket. This is just a concept drawing. Nothing like this was built, but it was called the Buran, and that's where the name came from. Usually there's a big long line of people up here trying to challenge me on the moon hoax, the moon landing hoax, and 9/11 and everything else,
but over here,
I'm happy to talk about anything. Huh?
Over here, nobody has any questions about that.
No?
No.
Yes, they do. We had pub nights last night and the night before with some of my listeners who are here in Berlin, and there's quite a lot of that. One guy must have had about 6 beers, and he wanted to launch into the 9/11 conspiracy. It's No, I don't have a presentation about that. I won't talk about that.
Okay, so no questions at all. Well, yes, please walk to the mic and you can ask your question.
Oh.
Well, in that context, I ran around something that General Vladimir Ilyushin should have been the first Russian cosmonaut. And there was some kind of an interview where he said, yes, it is true, I was the first, I burned somehow up during re-entry. And could you say something?
Vladimir Ilyushin, I don't know a whole lot about this. I know a little bit, and mostly what I came across while I was researching this particular topic. Vladimir Ilyushin, is that close enough to the correct pronunciation? He's another Soviet cosmonaut, and he's still alive to this day. And he claims that he launched, in place of Gagarin, he actually flew. It might have been, he may have said he flew the day before or the same day, but his craft didn't make it into orbit. There was some problem with the engines, and he crash landed without completing a single orbit in China. And he bailed out like he was supposed to. He was captured by the Chinese. He had a very serious leg injury, and the Chinese held him in captivity, basically, as a political prisoner for a year before they finally returned him to the Soviet Union. And he maintains to this day that that's what actually happened, and that Gagarin was just a smiling young face that they took out. They took the backup capsule, they took it and they made it look like it crash landed somewhere in Siberia, and they pulled Gagarin out, and he came out with his big happy smile and became the national hero. So that is, that's a topic that I really look forward into researching in more detail. It doesn't require the great leaps of logic that you'd have to make for the Ludmila recording to be true, for example. So that, that's one that's a little bit more plausible. It is in character with what the Soviets would have done. One of the other recordings that was on here, the heartbeat. Not the heartbeat, the SOS, just the doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo that was going straight away from the Earth. That's been interpreted as, well, maybe something went wrong on one of the engines. They went off course and it just started going off, lost into space. The problem with that is that the Vostok R7 booster at that time could not launch more than 500 kilograms into low Earth orbit. It certainly could not launch a capsule with a man in it out of orbit. They had flown Luna probes. There was a series of probes called the Lunas that flew actually past the moon. But that was just a tiny little box like this big was all it was. It was not the size and weight of a capsule. They simply didn't have any hardware capable of launching someone into orbit at all, certainly not out of orbit, that could have made that Morse code recording. So we have, there's other good reasons why most of these other recordings cannot possibly be what they've popularly been interpreted as. Yes, sir.
Thank you. I have a question once more regarding the Ludmila recording. You said that the Italian brothers had the possibility of triangulating in order to determine that the signal actually comes from space. And if that is true, I don't see how it could be some kind of ground control in a simulator.
How it could be some kind of a ground control in simulator? I don't have the data on the Ludmila recording for what they said the speed and the altitude was. So that might be a valid criticism, it might not. I don't know. Another thing that's been put forward as a guess is something called moon bounce, or radio repeaters. Sometimes they would, in the early 1960s, we were starting to launch small little satellites around that were just used as a radio repeater, so you could do line of sight radio broadcasting around the curvature of the Earth. Those were not yet in place at the time that these recordings took place, so you can't say that the Ludmila recording sounds like it was coming from orbit because it was bouncing off of one of these radio repeaters. That's not possible because the radio repeaters didn't exist. So what about moon bounce? Moon bounce is where you take a signal, you shoot it at the moon, and it bounces back to Earth. It's another way of kind of doing a poor man's communication satellite. Moon bounce is a possibility. I don't know enough about it to determine if what I read was true or not, because I found sources on both sides that said this could have possibly happened, some that said it couldn't possibly have happened. So I don't know about that. But again, you wouldn't have the same speed and altitude data, that you wouldn't have the Doppler effect.
Okay, thank you.
Not particular question, but thank you for talking here. I'm a great fan of your podcast.
Oh, thank you very much.
One little thing maybe, please use metric.
What's that?
Please use metric.
I know. I usually give this in the United States, and that's
I know,
one thing. Yesterday I realized, I got to go through that and change it.
Totally excused. I would just be...
No, that's a perfectly valid, but doesn't it make me seem more foreign and exotic being here, coming?
Yeah. No, it would make it much more easy to listen to. I'm getting into the imperial system, but it's really strange.
Guilty as charged. I have no excuse. Thank you.
Thank you.
Regarding the Ludmilla recording, you mentioned that there was a long